I'm Phil Cornish. I'm back with Cornish Talks Common Sense. We've been talking about some principles that underlie the thought processes and how people are viewing our world as it exists today. And I want to talk to you about some of these specific issues. We just talked about one, and that was the idea of our debt being out of control, a debt trap that we're in that is going to lead us eventually to a disastrous place that we've allowed to accumulate with no restraints. I want to turn now to another topic, and that's the idea of media responsibility, because another cultural war that exists today is the war that exists between conservative and liberal interests that we see play out in the news today. And so we have different, for example, news networks that come from different perspectives. You'll see networks that come from a conservative perspective and news media that come from liberal perspective. And the liberal perspective, no doubt, has been dominant. And that's because, again, they have followed the underlying principles that I've spoken to you about, the idea of postmodernism philosophy, the idea of allowing feelings to govern and supersede over all else, the idea that we're here on our own, we formulate our own worldview and our own truth values from our own subjective thoughts that we make up, not from any objective truth that derives from the idea of God. So I want to talk a little bit about media responsibility. We have seen in recent years how media have skewed the presentation of facts. And one area where this came fully into play recently in Canada was the Freedom Convoy, the COVID protesters in February. Now, I watched a little of the coverage of that on CBC and CTV, which normally I really would not do. And the guests that they had on and the way that they portrayed those news stories completely colored and changed the reality of what was happening. Let me give you a few examples of that. So you had news media saying that protesters in Ottawa were there to overthrow the government, that they were breaking laws and causing disruption. They wanted to associate it with a few people who didn't think acceptably, as Prime Minister Trudeau would say, a few people who were being controlled by racism and homophobia and those kind of pejorative denunciations that the media threw out against people who were trying to promote the idea of freedom. Well, as it turns out, they did that by lying to the public. And I can tell you that it's interesting how that just in recent news stories that have come out, they've talked to us about how the media falsely portrayed stories about money coming in to sponsor protesters from American organizations and organizations outside Canada that were dangerous and not appropriate sources. And so this woke, progressive, media-supported crowd in fact, were perpetrating falsehoods of what was happening there. And this has now been called out. And in fact, there are news stories where CBC has been forced to apologize over these false stories that they were portraying on the news. And that should cause us concern when these mainstream media outlets are perpetrating false stories of what is happening. Let me give you some other examples. Some of you might know of an author that appears regularly in Post media, an author who is writing from England named Gwyn Dyer. And I have an article that he published back in December December 24th of last year. And I want you to listen to what he said in his news column. He says, there's more than 100 million people, most of whom were unhappy with memories of Russian rule and lingering fear of Russian domination. That's why they all joined NATO. They will never let the Russians make them vulnerable again, and there's no reason for NATO to give in to Putin's demands. Besides, the notion Russia might invade Ukraine is frankly ridiculous. Now, here is a mainstream author who's been writing for decades saying there is no way Russia is going to invade Ukraine as recently as December 24th last year. Well, we all know how that went. A more recent article he wrote said that, well, Russia will wipe out the Ukrainian forces and destroy the Ukrainian army in a matter of days. Well, we know that story also has proven to be false. And we can look to many other examples that we hear news stories from that simply are not portraying truth. If we look at in the American context, now a big news item story is the Hunter Biden laptop. President Biden's son, who has been said to be taking money under the table or inappropriately from foreign governments or corporations, and doing so in a way that might well be illegal. And mainline media outlets disregarded that and covered that story up for months. News organizations like CNN and other mainline American news organizations did not publish it. And only now is it starting to make news and become accepted as being true. So again, we see a confrontation between truth and falsehood. And falsehood has, to some extent, won out. And truth has taken a back seat. And so being vigilant to understand what is truth and what is falsehood and what are the underlying agendas and motivations of the media and social media in putting out their stories and putting out their messages, we need to understand there are values behind it. And these truths that are portrayed are not factual, not valid, not credible, and not true. And these are reasons why you and I need to be concerned about this madness that is happening in our world today and changing the course of the direction that we're going. I hope we can help you do that on this program, and we'll come back again and talk to you about more of these issues shortly.